I think it's working. Our webinar is being live streamed. I'm just waiting to
Love it.
making sure that there's no volume feedback here once it actually pops up on the delay. Hello, YouTube.
Hello, YouTube.
Okay, that was the feedback. You ready to go, big dog?
Is my mic working well?
I think so. You want to do the
Yeah, can
test?
you hear me differently here as you can here?
I can. I'm glad
Now
we found the
YouTube
test
knows
that
the
you like.
magic.
I'm glad you found a test that you like. How about me,
Oh,
Greg? Can you hear me differently over here as you hear me right here?
I can, but you look beautiful in both places. 1 second, I'll
It's
be
not
right
about
back.
how I look, it's how I sound, GC.
I know.
All right, buddy.
Hey, Mom.
Game on. Let's go. All right. Welcome, 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 everybody, to a very nervous edition of the Not Your Average Investor Show today. I'm staying home because I'm a little under the weather, so I didn't come into studio. But today, it's unavoidable, right? All these executive orders, this new administration, there is just way too much talk in the ecosystem about this and how it's going to affect the economy and whatnot. So it is our duty to come on this show and discuss how we believe this may or may not affect housing prices, the housing market, the outlook for real estate investors. Add a little bit of perspective. But I will ask the community that we do not want to add political perspective here. We are specifically speaking about how based on our experience, this may or may not affect the housing market. So be kind to us. This is an apolitical show. I'm your host, Pablo Gonzalez. With me, as always, across the screen this time, live from JWB Studios, the man I affectionately like to call GC because of his genius concepts, because he knows how to generate cash flow, because he's a great co-host, and because his name is Greg Cohen. Say hello, Greg.
Hello, everybody. Fantastic to be with you today.
Fantastic to be with you, my friend. I see the attendance ticking up as we knew it would when we bring up a topic that everybody is talking about. But I think what everybody's tuning in for is our tradition. What's that, GC?
The roll call,
The roll
baby.
call, baby. We got the MVP lead checking in first, Lee Bishop. We got our leadoff hitter batting second today, John Henning. We got William Ramos. New name,
New
right? New
name.
name. Welcome to the show, William. We got Jeff Pettijohn checking in from Missouri, who we know well. We got the patron Santorios of the Natural Average Invest Show from Northern Virginia, Michael Santorios. We've got the better Greg Stone checking in with a howdy from New Jersey. We got the world class composer from Long Island, New York, John Williams. We got the Shaw man of the Natural Average Investor Show, Nadeem Shah. We got Michelle checking in, teammate from Jacksonville here. We got the Maven from the mountains of Denver, but from Nuevo Vallarta, or is that an autocorrect? Are you in Puerto Vallarta, Leslie? Whatever. Leslie's always traveling, doing awesome things because she lives the life of all real estate investors dream of. We got the early bird Dean Curry checking in with a good morning. We got Mark Sauer. He's back from Cincinnati, Ohio. We got the man of steel, Vincent Barbarai, checking in with a good morning afternoon. We got Le Monsieur, Reggie Francais from Le Inland Empire, checking in. Bonjour to you, Reggie. We got Ed Lowry, LinkedIn Lowry, checking in with 75 to 80 all week in Jacksonville. It's been wonderful in Jacksonville, except for those moments of like very dense, cold fog. I don't know. How do you deal with GC? How do you deal with when it's cold and humid? It's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. You don't quite know what to do. Especially in the
Uh,
mornings and at night, you feel like it's like ominous and you go out and you're warm and you feel like you should jump in the ocean. I don't know.
all right, all right. Well, we got Beth DePaula, a new name from Alabama. Good to have you, Beth. I hope you make yourself comfortable here in the community. Alex Diaz is back. I remember Alex from last week. Good to have you, Alex. Happy you're making a habit of this. We got Big Papa in the house. I love it when he calls him Big Papa, the co-founder of the co-founder, Greg's dad, Jay. We got Kevin O'Brien wishing us a looking forward to the JWB Summit. Kevin O'Brien, he says. We got our favorite name to pronounce, Aaron O'Neill, into the
Into the light.
lights. William Ramos he's from Jacksonville. He checked in earlier. We got from the illustrious Hudson Valley of New York, Chris Consaga checking in. Roslyn Lee from New York, New York. Roslyn, that's a new name. Welcome to the show. Hope you make yourself comfortable. Richard Drennan, I believe, is a new name as well from your neck of the woods, GC, from Pittsburgh.
Steeler fan
Another
right
Steeler over
there.
there. Eric Killo from Blooming Prairie, Minnesota. A bunch of new names. I hope everybody's making themselves comfortable here, making some friends. David Bajani saying hello, everybody. Another new name. Good to have you. Stephen Minakovich from Cape Coral, Florida. That's over by my neck of the woods down. Oh, no, Cape Coral is West Coast, right? Is that?
Yeah.
Yes. I was confusing it with Coral Springs. So Cape Coral, one of the fastest growing little towns in Florida, right? Misty Johnson, speaking of fastest growing, Misty Johnson, top 10 attendee of all time. Miss Rack Well-Do from Northern Virginia. Good to have you, Miss Rack. Another new name. We've got the Duchess, Katrina Maline, in the house, checking in as well. We got Sir Jeffrey Bolton. Greetings and salutations. Justine Herrera from SoCal. Good to have you, Justine. Good to have you back. We got the patriarch and the matriarch of the first family, Ken and Carolyn Maline, where it is raining in Los Altos. We salute you.
We salute
Good
you.
to have you, the first family in the house. For Lucky Bamingbade. Oh, Yemi from Tampa. All right. I'm glad I messed that up just in time for you, Yemi. Welcome to the show. I mess up people's names all the time. We got Tammy Game Time from Gamison from Colorado. Rajiv from Jacksonville. All right. Pamela Myers, our favorite smile from the Pacific Northwest. JJ in Ojai, California. You ever been to Ojai, Juan Jose?
No, didn't even know it existed, to be quite honest.
Lovely little wine country just north of LA. It's a beautiful little place, man. Beautiful little place.
that.
Inland from Santa Barbara. I see you, Ojai. Zenobia Lewis from Stone Mountain, Georgia, in the house. Chris Lee from Fernandina Beach. Man, we got it. We got everybody checking in. All right, Linda Mercurio from South Carolina. Good to see you, Linda. That's a great last name, Mercurio. JC, you said we got an update on the summit. We only got 7 tickets left. Tell me more.
This many, buddy. This many. We have 7 tickets left for Summit. We're super, super stoked to have everybody here. As you can see in the chat, we're not the only ones. This is the Not Your Average Investor Summit. We do it once a year. It's our opportunity to come from beyond this wonderful Zoom and online and social community that we have, and to get to make even more deep friendships, get to meet the JWB team, get to see the JWB investments, all along the backdrop of what is going on in downtown Jacksonville. You get to be in the room with folks that are investing billions of dollars and with other officials that are making large-scale decisions on what is going on in downtown Jacksonville. You get to be there. It's going to be a room like no other. So we hope you guys are excited if you already have your ticket. If you don't yet, what are you waiting for? There are 7 tickets left, and you can go to jwbsummit.com to go and snag one of those 7 remaining tickets. And lastly, this event is for JWB clients. And if you are not a JWB client yet, that is okay. We still have space for you. What you will want to do is to become a JWB client by the time that Summit rolls around. And Summit will be here February 28th and March 1st. It's a 2-day event. So for all of our current clients, if you haven't signed up yet, go to jwbsummit.com. If you are thinking about becoming a JWB client and you want to take part in Summit, there is still time. Get on the phone with our team, set up a time to chat, and we can bring you down the path to hopefully having you as a JWB client in time for Summit. How'd I do, Pops? What'd I forget?
3 things to prepare for if you're coming to Summit. 1, big bear hug from Lee. You will get one. I hope that you are prepared for that. He gives world-class hugs. 2, you're going to be in a room full of people like you. Prepare to not feel like a weirdo because you're obsessed with controlling your outcomes for retirement, because you're obsessed with real estate and doing things differently. And 3, Saturday night, we will host a karaoke night. You will see me sing Total Eclipse of the Heart. I've done it 100 times. I promise you, it is something to behold. So if you haven't gotten your ticket yet, there's 7 left. You don't want to miss out on those 3 things. jwbsummit.com. How'd I do, Greg?
You did well, brother. I don't think people really understand the opportunity to see you sing Total Eclipse of the Heart. So that by itself is going to sell this thing out.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, we'll see. Hopefully one day, I'll get discovered through one of these summits. All right, GC, let's talk about this. Again, we mentioned this at the top of the call. We now have over 120 people on this call. We know that this is a hot button topic. Our goal here is not to be political. Our goal here is to talk about things that may or may not happen and how that may or may not affect real estate. So please be kind in the chat. Let's not be hard driving. Let's not be unfriendly with each other. But we are willing to do the hard work for you and put ourselves in an uncomfortable place because we know that you want to talk about this thing. So as we kick this thing off, GC, basically what's been coming down if you're hiding under a rock, administration change in the United States over the last week since it happened, there's been a ton of executive orders that have been flying out. There have been policy changes that have been spoken about. We're not going to mince kind of like lines between what's a policy, what's an executive order, but we're going to talk about the big things that are happening right now. But essentially, what this new administration has said is that it is part of their mandate to lower housing costs and increase the housing supply for the average American. That is something that we believe is good for our country, and we are on that same mission, right? Like this idea that real estate, making it accessible for all, including homeowners, including investors. Their beliefs, their assumptions is that they see an estimated imposed cost of about $50K in costs for the average American household, then can be reduced by eliminating some regulatory hurdles and getting rid of rent-seeking practices. GC, I will kick it over to you right there after that setup for you to just kind of like put us on track here for this discussion.
Yeah, well, since Inauguration Day, there has been a flurry of executive orders. And the one that meant the most to me, given my nature of my career, is this executive order that we're largely going to focus on today, which called for all of the heads of agencies and departments to report to the president, to put a plan together and to enact changes to lower the cost of housing and to expand supply. I think that's important that it wasn't just mentioned about lowering the cost of housing. It also talked about expanding the supply, which is something we've talked a lot about in this community for a very, very long time now. And, regardless of where you are and where you sit and which part of the aisle you're on, I think we all can rally around the idea that housing affordability is a major problem. And we all want to put these things in place that is going to increase housing affordability. Now, the way that we do that has a lot of differing opinions. And, we're going to create the platform here today to share what is happening, what we believe will be the effect on housing. And it will have a couple of different perspectives, because the reality, guys, is there's still a lot to be determined here. The how it will be done and what the impact will be is something that we together get to take the ride on, because a lot of that has not been determined yet, and the effects of this won't be known. And the other thing, guys, is like none of this is done in a vacuum. So when we talk about one of these executive orders, what might that have effect? Might it have on housing? Well, there's another executive order, another part of the executive order that could have a counter effect. So I think this discussion today is to be informed about what potentially can affect housing. It is not about what is right or wrong, and it's not about what definitely is going to happen, because this is a complicated solution that we hope to attain as Americans, and I think that's where our focus should be.
Well said, bud. Well said. I think you said that nicely. And there is a White House Council on eliminating regulatory barriers to affordable housing that was established in 2019. That plays a significant role in addressing housing affordability, with its functions including interagency coordination, regulatory reduction, zoning reform and advocacy, incentive programs, policy development, collaboration with stakeholders, promotion of the housing supply, and implementation. Right. So there is real kind of like, there is strings attached to this thing. There is levers of influence here that can take form. I would say that the hot button kind of like topics, let's just kind of like go straight into it, are a couple of subjects, right? Like there is the hot button of what's happening with immigration and how that can affect housing, and then there's the hot button of what's happening with tariffs. I don't know if either of these are actual executive orders, but this is definitely stuff that's in the ecosystem that I think we would be remiss without talking about. And then we're going to go into the National Housing Board or something like that, NAHB.
National Association of Home Builders.
I'm not
some little national board.
I'm more
somewhere.
of a numbers guy, Greg. I'm more of a numbers guy. National Association of Home Builders, and their plan, right? They have a 10-point plan, which, we largely support here. So like, how can all this stuff kind of like based on these executive orders and stuff be affected, right? So GC, let's talk about let's talk about the tough one, right? Let's talk about immigration. These immigration policies have sparked a whole bunch of debate regarding potential impacts on housing costs. There is talk about, strengthening the border. There's talk about deporting illegal immigrants and criminals and stuff like that. And as we all know, there's a heavy migrant population that works inside of building construction, right? So kind of like how do you see the pluses and minuses of what's going on around immigration, GC?
Well, I think we are all hearing a lot about the supply side, the effect of this, and a large percentage of the work that is done in certain trades on building homes is done by immigrants. And the question is, will this reduce the supply, or will it take longer to build homes, which in theory could drive housing costs up? So this is an example where we don't know exactly how this is going to shake out, meaning how it would be implemented. But when we talk about how none of these executive orders are done in a vacuum, the overall executive order says we are going to put in measures to expand the housing supply. One might say with the immigration policy, this might, in that small vacuum, that might actually do the opposite. If you're just looking at it from the construction supply side, because you have less available labor to go ahead and build those homes. And I think that's what's getting most of the headlines. But I do think that there are many sides to this potential story as well. That is largely focusing on the supply side. On the demand side, if this would happen, and nobody knows to what degree it may happen, but there's also a demand side here. And the immigrants that we are talking about here largely occupy those affordable homes. And so if those folks are no longer living in those homes, there could be some demand relief here, and it could actually help to alleviate the housing cost as well. So as with many of these things, I think there's multiple perspectives here, and I think you can make that when it comes to immigration. I think the real thing, though, is nobody knows how this would be implemented. If we knew exactly how this would be implemented, I think it would be a little easier to quantify.
That makes sense, man. And just to kind of clarify on some of the assumptions that you brought up, right? Like we are in an affordability crisis in America, right? Like it has gotten significantly harder for younger generations to buy starter homes, for lower income families, for workforce income families to buy homes. We've been talking a lot about the fact that it's not because Wall Street rushed into the space. They own a very small percentage of like these homes. It's because we have been historically undersupplied in single family homes, particularly in growing cities, particularly in this like workforce to affordable demographic. So the long-term solution to getting out of this affordability crisis is increase the supply of homes, right? We're neck and neck there, right, GC?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And what you are referring to right now is, if our take on the idea of need to increase the supply of homes is, if we're decreasing the labor force that's able to build these homes, it could have a negative impact. Now, on the other side, there's the demand for the homes, right? There's the folks that would be living in these homes, that would want to buy these homes, that would want to rent these homes. And it could end up being a wash in the sense of if the same amount of people that, like aren't able to build these homes now, we can't build at a certain rate, but we also need less people because they're leaving the country because of these mandates. This could wash out or like it could go either way. And that's like the one thing that we really don't have like a really good crystal ball for, right?
We don't. And, I do think though that the idea that stricter immigration policies would lead to homes not being built is a little far reaching, right? At the end of the day, home builders have always found a way to build homes. Where there's a market opportunity, I guarantee you home builders are going to find a way. That doesn't mean that it might be slower or there might be some growing pains to do that. But, at the end of the day, home builders are in business to make a profit. And when businesses see a problem, call that home price affordability, and the solution is to expand supply, home builders are going to find a way, regardless of whatever the immigration policy is and how it's administered. Home builders are going to find a way to build houses. They've done this for decades and decades and decades. And I think some of the questions that I have in my head are how much of a disruption? First of all, how does it get administered? If it is administered to the full extent, what type of a disruption does it have in the short and medium term for housing supply, and how many days does it take to build homes compared to what it did before as things would get stabilized? And then what effect does this have on pricing? Because, home builders have done quite well over the last few years, especially as far as their profit margins. So if they now are paying more for the labor, does that come out of their profit margins? How much? And then how much of that cost goes to the increase in housing prices overall? So again, with many of these, more questions than answers at this moment, but I think it's good to look at it from all angles and see what effects it could have.
Makes sense. You also bring up the idea of maybe if there is a decrease in the labor market, right? So there's the ability of bringing houses to market and the availability of doing it quickly. There's also the cost involved, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about cost when it comes to tariffs, but when it comes to labor force, could stand to reason that if there is less labor to do this, then the cost of labor may go up. That would also increase cost of homes. If that happens, as a real estate investor now, putting on my real estate investor hat, owning these hard assets, I would tend to think that then replacement value of my home goes up. Therefore, my prices are going to stay stable or continue to go up. If there is a slowness of the market to react because of labor, price of homes can continue to go up. I'm still good holding on to these assets. If there's like a giant reversal, maybe prices, they would take a lot for prices to just completely like go flat in order, based on all this stuff to happen, or even decrease. It would really, really take a lot. What's kind of like the real estate investor hat thinking about this possibilities that you're thinking?
If we're putting our investor hat on, guys, listen, the best thing you can do as an investor is to have something that people want a lot of and that there's not a lot of supply of it, right? That's what housing is right now. As an investor, owning the asset puts you in a position of strength. Now, at the same time, JWB is committed to making sure that home prices are affordable. We care deeply about the community. But if we're just looking at our investor hat and saying, what should you go out and invest in? You want to go out and invest in something that there's not a lot of, that a lot of people want, right? That's housing. So when we're relating it to things like home prices going up, home prices are likely to go up for a number of reasons, regardless of what happens in immigration. And the reality is that home prices tend to go up with the rate of inflation over the last 40 years. That's why we talk about it being a hedge against inflation. So nothing here would change my opinion that owning a home, specifically regarding immigration and the policy and where it goes from here, nothing changes our perception that this is a great time to buy and hold these assets. As the country figures out how to solve the affordable housing problem, this is a great time to buy and hold an asset. And I just want to make one other point too. In the executive order, he talks about how housing costs need to go down. Well, that doesn't mean that the price of homes goes down. There's a lot of ways and a lot of interpretations about what does housing costs going down really mean? Like, for example, the cost of housing is largely borne by the monthly payment that you make on your mortgage. That's largely how we look at what housing costs, folks. The easiest way for housing costs to go down, regardless of any of these policies, is if we could go back to 3% interest rates or 4% interest rates, right? So, and at the same time, housing prices can go up, interest costs could come down, and the cost of housing overall could come down. So I do want to make sure we're noticing that we're not talking about the executive order saying the price of housing needs to go down. It's the overall cost of housing and the percentage of the cost burden that average Americans are sharing related to their income and their wages is really what the goal is here.
Really good clarification. I literally just told Joanna this is a good clip from this episode. So that being said, let's let's move on to tariffs, right? Speaking of costs, there's executive orders talking about placing tariffs on Mexico, placing tariffs on Canada, almost, almost, like it just happened overnight where now there's like a 30-day kind of like wait on that based on this negotiation that now Canada and Mexico will strengthen the border. So it almost dovetails immediately into this immigration talk because you see how complex these issues are, right? But we're not going to get into like the complex of the politics. But talking tariffs, if we were to put in a tariff on Canada, where we get a lot of lumber from, or Mexico, how do you see this stuff affecting housing, GC?
Man, hot button item, man.
Hot
I feel
button,
like
baby.
all 140 people showed up to talk about tariffs because there have been a lot of discussions about that and different viewpoints on it. And there's, to further accentuate the point that things are changing by the day, when I put the notes together for some insights on tariffs yesterday, everything changed from yesterday till today with the leaders from Canada and Mexico and President Trump meeting. So, at the end of the day, tariffs would greatly impact the housing market, I think, when it comes to the cost of building a new home, simply because Canadian lumber and gypsum are 70% of the materials that we use to go ahead and construct those homes using those materials. 70%. They're our number one trading partner. And there's already, I believe, a 10 or a 15% tariff. You'll have to check the notes on that. Already in place before we're now talking about enacting new tariffs. So an additional 25% tariff has certainly caught the ears and the eyes of many of the home builders, many in the home building industry. National Association of Home Builders came out and said, I don't know, we don't really like that, specifically from the lens of what it would do for housing costs. And it makes sense if you're running the numbers. 70% of one of the major inputs in a home going up by 25 to maybe 40% of a cost. It's hard to understand how that, specifically in that one example, how that would not potentially have an increase to the cost of housing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, I love the distinction you made before. This would be the cost of bringing homes to market and the cost of replacement for your home. So I would assume that, these tariffs go in, cost of lumber goes up. It kind of does what it did a couple years ago when we had a lumber shortage. This idea that home prices would go up because of that, and therefore, as an investor, as somebody that holds a hard asset, it's kind of an advantageous position to get in either before these tariffs hit or be holding right now.
Listen, housing prices are going to go up in the long run, regardless of whatever happens here for tariffs, right? And I only say that because in 97% of years in Jacksonville, I'll just speak from 97% of years, housing prices go up. So again, I'll keep going to the backdrop. This conversation is really interesting, and I think it's important to be aware of what's happening. But over the long haul, this doesn't change the value proposition of why you buy and hold single-family rental properties, especially in a growth market like Jacksonville. So I don't think it'll have a long-term effect. And then, there are viewpoints that could actually lead to a decrease in housing costs when it comes to implementing tariffs as well. And I think we should shed some light there. The idea that a tariff can be something of that can create leverage is what we're seeing in the conversations that President Trump is having with Mexico and Canada. And, that the theory is that can lead to overall decreases in costs in other places. And the other idea is that if you put a tariff on Canada, which we have a trade deficit with, that they are going to be willing to help in other areas that could decrease the cost of housing. So that certainly is out there, and I think it's fair to see that is an angle as they're negotiating right now. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you have 70% of the material coming from Canada and Mexico, that means that there's a lack of that material being built domestically. And so in theory, if you can build domestically, you have the opportunity to build it at a lower cost and to have more control over the supply chain. And so that might stabilize prices or actually get prices down over the medium and the long run as well. So again, you know, if this would come into play, how it would come into play, what perspective are you looking at it from the immediate short run, or are you looking from medium long term? You can land at a very, what I would say, a different conclusion as to what effect this would have on housing and the cost of housing.
Makes sense, man. At the end of the day, constraints drive innovation, right? So if we are gonna put these constraints and put these tariffs on, maybe like the domestic the domestic manufacturing piece innovates and we have more control over it, we're able to drive down our own prices and do things that way. So there can be some good long-term ramifications here if it all works out. Again, to just talk about how it mixes in everything else, I think Lee is saying that there's a big supply in our Northwest, right? So like maybe once you pair these executive orders with the other ones that have to do with climate change and whatnot, they open up more supply. That could also drive down prices, things of that sort. So a little bit out of the scope, but it all kind of like relates, right? All these different things if we're looking at it specifically from the housing lens. GC, I'd like to get into the National Association of Home Builders, but you mentioned a big keyword that is kind of like the giant variable here, which is interest rates, right? Like nothing is as good at driving down cost of housing as interest rates are, right? So, do we want to talk a little bit about interest rates? Because I believe that one of the I don't know if it was an executive order or if it was just like a, hey, Fed, take down the interest rate, right? But like there's definitely an overt request for that. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, where do we go? Where do we go from here? I mean, you know, there's a lot of, listen, at the end of the day, you know, the best driver of housing affordability is for long-term mortgage interest rates to come down. Everybody knows that. But there are real reasons as to why it's not happening yet. And you know, that's before President Trump took office, right? You know, before these executive orders started to come into play, there have been questions about our deficit, and you know, ultimately our long-term interest rates are largely based on how appealing it is for people like you and me and people who control large amounts of money as well to go in and say, I want to invest in 10-year treasuries, right? I want to go and let the government borrow my money for 10 years and make a certain interest rate. And when there's concerns or questions about what our national deficit is, and when there are concerns about inflation, it has less of a demand for people to go out and let the government borrow their money for 10 years. And the reason that's related to our mortgage interest rates is because investors look at what people are earning for that 10-year treasury yield, and they largely say, well, then I'm going to go and let home buyers borrow my money for, you know, 30-year mortgages. And so it's all related to that. And now, you know, this discussion's been going on again before President Trump even was elected. So those are the reasons why interest rates haven't come down. It's because inflation has stuck around for longer than expected, and there were concerns about our national deficit. Now, with some of these executive orders, questions about tariffs, questions about immigration, questions about all of this have maybe led to more concerns or less concerns or whatnot. The market really doesn't know where to go from here. And so you've seen interest rates actually, 30-year mortgage rates actually do a little bit of this since Trump took office. And it's because, again, we don't really know. But there are, I mean, and then there's other things that have been talked about that are affecting the psyche of what is the 30-year interest rate really, what should it be right now? Mm-hmm. There's this conversation about taking Fannie and Freddie, which have been under government conservatorship since the Great Recession, and having them leave government conservatorship. And you know, what would that do to interest rates? Most economists think that in and of itself and that vacuum would actually lead to longer 30-year mortgage rates as well. So Guys,
Can you explain that real quick? What is the Fannie Freddie? What is government conservatorship? And what did you say it's gonna go longer, the 30-year? It's gonna increase or decrease? What can you just explain that real quick?
yeah, absolutely. So so prior to the Great Recession, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who basically create the secondary market for mortgages in our country, they buy all of the mortgages from, in essence, from the banks that make the mortgages for us, and they create liquidity in the secondary market.
Mhm.
They they were not under government conservatorship prior to the Great Recession. Then in the Great Recession, they were about to go belly up, but the government couldn't let that happen. And so what the government did was provide a lot of liquidity to Fannie and Freddie, but they said, all right, we're going to give you this, but number one, we're going to sort of take pseudo ownership of you. And guys, this is just me talking. Again, I don't know all the terms, exactly what conservatorship means as far as ownership or anything. I'm just trying to make it simple, right?
It certainly rolls right off the tongue, conservatorship.
Conservatorship, right? And they said, all right, well, we'll bail you out, but we're gonna basically run the show. And then they're gonna say, Fannie and Freddie, you're gonna pay us back a lot. And they have. And Fannie and Freddie has become a performing asset for the government. Well, now Fannie and Freddie are making a lot of money again. And the push has been talked about as far as when's the right time for Fannie and Freddie to no longer be under government conservatorship. And the way that this relates to all of us as real estate investors is Fannie and Freddie are government-sponsored entities that help keep our mortgage rates low. Fannie and Freddie are government-sponsored entities that other countries don't have. And so when you go to another country and you say, can I have a 30-year mortgage and have a low rate like we get in our country? You don't get that. And it's because they don't have these government-sponsored entities. Well, we still are going to have Fannie and Freddie, but if they are no longer under government conservatorship, the question is, does the interest rates inherently go up for the borrowers because they're no longer, essence, 100% backed by the government? And nobody knows the answer to that. But that would be the train of thought that might say, well, if Fannie and Freddie leave government conservatorship, would that in and of itself be an increase to interest rates, would actually take away from housing affordability? So did I do okay there? Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm essentially hearing Freddie and Fannie would go through some form of deregulation if this were to happen, and that would essentially create, I don't know if deregulation,
I don't know if it's deregulation.
Is it like less like oversight? I mean, I guess that's deregulation. Is it just kind of like less rules and less stuff?
I don't think anybody really knows.
Anybody.
But
cool.
they
would go through some kind of context change. Fannie and Freddie.
Leaving conservatorship literally means not being kind of like owned by the government. Like right now, when Fannie and Freddie make money, it goes into the government's bank accounts as well as Fannie's and Freddie's. I don't know how that works, but it would not be like it is today. There we go. We'll keep it real general.
Cool. Sounds good. So context change, meaning could have externalities that we don't know about, right? So let's talk about this 10-point plan from the National Association of Builders. Did I get that right? All right. To address this, 10 points are: number one, eliminate excessive regulations; number two, promote careers in the skilled trades; number three, fix building material supply chains and ease costs; number four, pass federal tax legislation to expand the production of affordable and attainable housing; five, overturn inefficient local zoning rules; six, alleviate permitting roadblocks; seven, adopt reasonable and cost-effective building codes; eight, reduce local impact fees and other upfront taxes associated with housing construction; nine, make it easier for developers to finance new housing; and 10, update employment policies to promote flexibility and opportunity. Let's just take it right off the top with number one, this idea of eliminating excessive regulation. What do you know about excessive regulation and how that contributes to housing costs, GC?
I see a lot of it. I see our housing costs have increased dramatically, both on the development side and on the home building side. And so we see it firsthand. And, you know, I I wanted to spend some time sharing this 10-point plan from the National Association of Home Builders, because some of you who are listening may be saying, all right, Greg, well, you've done a pretty good job of painting both sides of the equation when it comes to things like immigration or tariffs or whatnot. That really is my goal here. So those are hot button items. But you might be saying, well, what do you think? What do you really think the plan is? And where do you guys stand behind at JWB? And this 10-point plan largely outlines the initiatives that JWB believes would have the biggest impact to improve our housing affordability. And the first one is there for a reason. According to the National Association of Home Builders, 25% of the cost to build one single family home and 40% of the cost to build an apartment is due to regulatory costs. So we need to have the right amount of regulation, but burdening a home by 25% or maybe 40% due to regulation seems like an opportunity for us to decrease the cost of housing, to build it, which in theory and in actuality would dramatically lead to more home price affordability. And to put some numbers to it, according to the National Association of Home Builders and the studies they put together, $31,000 of cost in a house comes from these regulations. That's 31 grand. You know, houses in Jacksonville we sell for, call it around 250,000. I mean, that's a lot of opportunity for us to sharpen the pencil and make a really dramatic impact for Americans.
If I was to just kind of like double click in on that, GC, it sounds like we're talking there as far as like bringing homes to market and reducing kind of like the supply constraints to a certain extent. If we are talking about cost of home ownership and we were to eliminate a bunch of regulations, is there a case that could be made that may or may not even out in cost of actual home ownership? Like, could that, like, if we reduce regulations, could that also maybe increase maintenance on the back end, or even increase insurance, because insurance now feels like there's kind of like less regulations, so now they gotta price that in or something like that. Would that be a fair thing to ponder?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was going on in my mind. I was like, the idea of reducing regulations and saving 31 grand, sure, that sounds great, but what are you giving up? And so there's an example here that I did some research and I found that I think accentuates the opportunity to sharpen the pencil a little bit. And so a recent study, and this was done by the Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City, and this is that same study that found that the cost, it's an additional $31,000 of additional cost due to regulation to build one single family home. According to their study, it would require up to 90. So they also looked at the savings, like the energy efficiency savings that are being required. And they ran the study for the energy efficiency savings. And they said, basically, it's just a little bit of an energy efficiency savings. Like, according to them, the homes that we are building now have been improved so much over the years that the net savings is really small. And according to their study, it would take up to 90 years for a home buyer who would be receiving that a little bit of energy savings to recoup the cost of the $31,000 of additional cost. So they're looking at it from the lens of the end buyer, who may or may not know that they're actually being burdened by these costs. And they're looking at, what's the payback? What's the return on investment there? And 90 years sounds like a lot to me. So this is not a push that I have or that JWB has, that we should eliminate all regulation. We should just take a deep dive and look at it. Look at what is the return on investment for the end home buyer here. And I do believe that there's a lot of opportunities for us to be thoughtful and prudent about this, and, you know, and ultimately reduce the cost to build a house. Because if you reduce the cost to build a house, what you're doing is you're lowering the future price gains in real estate, the future cost increases. We have certainly seen how cost increases have been a contributing factor to home prices going up over the last 4 years. And if we continue to have excessive, costly regulation that doesn't really put money in the pockets of our home buyers, then we're not on the fastest track to home price affordability.
I'm glad I'm glad that you were so prepared for that because I was a little bit concerned that I was going to bring this up and it would short circuit you. So that was not planned that you had that example yet. Man, that's really cool. That's really good to hear. The fact that this has been studied, that this can be really like a big win, and that there is real meat on the bone there to cut. Man, like that makes me pretty optimistic. Points 2 and 3, promoting skills in the trades. That doesn't really feel kind of like, within what we're talking about right now. Material supply, chains that, we can talk about that with tariffs, but we pretty much beat that up. 4, passing federal tax legislation to expand the production of affordable and attainable housing. GC, what do you think about this?
Man, I love this. I love this. So this is a program that we know here in Jacksonville. It's called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit, and it's a great program. And the thing about it is people generally know that it works. It works because what it does is it incentivizes developers and investors to invest in missing middle housing. Missing middle is the type of housing that we need in our workforce housing neighborhoods. That might be townhomes, it might be duplexes, triplexes, quads, apartments, right? Missing middle housing is a big need. And so these low-income housing tax credits allow us to do that. They work. Everybody sort of agrees that they work. The problem is there's just not enough funding there. And the reason that they work for everybody here, not just developers and investors, is because in order to do one of these deals as a developer, you have to commit to keeping your rents at affordable levels for a certain period of time, maybe 10 years, 15 years, or maybe even up to 40 years. And so you are securing affordable rents in the market for these developments. So we've got a model that works. There's just not nearly enough funding. For JWB, if there was more funding out there to do things like this, we could do 10 of these a year in essence right now. And right now we're working on our very first one at the moment. But from an ability to perform it, there's nothing holding us back. It's the funding. It's the funding that is holding it back. So expanding and passing legislation to expand those types of incentive programs, I think, is a wonderful opportunity for our country.
That sounds awesome. Do you hear a lot of that on the table? I feel like that's something that's not really being talked about right now, even though it's a point in this thing.
I think we're fighting for it.
Okay.
I don't know. I know it's something that we talk a lot about. But it is more of from what I understand, it's beyond the local level. It's the state and the federal level. And so, we'll just keep shouting from the rooftops and hopefully they hear us.
This is our platform. We get to shout about whatever we want. All right, number 5. Speaking of things that we like to shout about, overturning inefficient local zoning rules. I feel like this is one that we can all really get behind, right? This idea of like, hey, low-hanging fruit here is to increase density, change these like inefficient land use policies, reduce the need for parking in a world where autonomous vehicles are taking over and all this type of stuff. What do you think about this one, GC?
Man, this just seems like something that's in our locus of control. It is something that we can control, and that can lead to very large gains in supply. And especially in Jacksonville, I think it matters even more here because as a city, we have a lot of land. We are not densely populated like other cities. So when we're thinking about the supply solution here, that means that we have more of an opportunity here. If we can change some of our inefficient zoning rules to allow for more density, we can build, twice as many units on the same given land, or maybe more than that. And ultimately, if we keep our focus on supply is the problem, this is something that can have a large effect. So things that you can do, again, talking about expanding missing middle housing like townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, things like that. But then also reducing parking requirements, reducing other variance requirements that limit the amount of units that you can build on a piece of land. And it's within our control. I think a lot of this comes down to communities and neighborhoods being open to it. There is a lot of what's called NIMBYism, which stands for not in my backyard-ism. And, if I'm just speaking for the general populations, we as a general population across this country are resistant to missing middle housing. That's the reason why it hasn't been done more. And that NIMBYism is sort of protected by antiquated zoning codes. You go to other countries, you don't see the same type of layouts of housing that you see in, you know, in our country. So if we can evolve a little bit and you know, the zoning codes can follow that evolution of us being open to more density, millions of Americans are going to benefit from this.
You know what I like about these last two, it feels like something that we can all get behind, right? Like this, it feels pretty bipartisan. It feels like it helps everybody, right? Like I think we've done a real good job here, and I really appreciate the community of just kind of like walking this fine line of people not yelling at each other in the chat or
I was really curious about that. Thank you for bringing me in there. Are we all just, is this just a beautiful, you know,
it has been
beautiful conversation? Like we can do this more often as Americans, right? I appreciate everybody.
I think so, man. I think so too. And I think this is we say it all the time, right? But this shows like a really safe space in the sense that it's a community of people that all get along and we all kind of like, you know, we're able to set our differences aside because we understand that there's a bigger problem at hand here, which is right now we're talking about affordability in housing. We often talk about like the need to like find better ways to get to retirement and taking control of our financial future. So I really do want to appreciate the community for like how not toxic this has been in any way, and not making it hard. Let's hit on a couple more things here. GC number 7: adopt reasonable and cost-effective building codes. I know that you highlighted this one as something that you wanted to talk about. You want to give your take on that?
Yeah, that's where that example came from that I shared with you of the minimal cost savings that these housing codes are requiring are just not having the payback that we have. And you know, a lot of these housing codes have been really wonderful over, call it the last couple of decades to get us to a place where we have, you know, such energy efficiency in the homes and whatnot. So the question really is it worth now to burden a new homeowner, call it $31,000 for a single family home to get this amount of cost savings on a monthly basis or an annual basis? And so there's a lot of examples like that. So these specific housing codes can be analyzed from a return on investment perspective and say, are we doing what we set out to do? Or are we causing more damage by this costly of a housing code that does not have that much of an impact, right? I think we are all about energy efficiency and costs to put into something if there is a big return on that investment to the end homeowner, because ultimately what that does is it improves housing affordability. I think what we're talking about here is improving those codes that do the opposite. And that example of it taking 90 years to get a payback would be an example of one of those.
I love it, man. You know what I think is what we armed everybody with a bunch of good ideas of like talking about this at a level when it comes to like real estate investing and a good plan forward to address the housing affordability crisis, to, you know, alleviate the supply, you know, and the demand kind of like offsetting. I just shared the blueprint itself in the chat if anybody wants to download it so you can talk about it. GC, I'd love to just kind of riff a little bit with you here at the end. There's a couple of decent questions. I got a take on commercial real estate and how it affects real estate investors. But I'll start with Michael Santorius, patron Santorius of the community, says, Greg, according to Rent Cafe, there's a 484% increase in office to apartment conversions over the past 4 years. New York, Washington, D.C. rank 1 and 2 respectively. Jacksonville is 14th on that list of the top 20 markets with the most planned office to apartment conversions. In your opinion, do you think this could help with affordable housing and by increasing supply?
Pedro Santorius, great question. So do I think it can help? Yes. But I do think it's important to point out a couple of things. I haven't read that article, but 484% increase to me sounds substantial. My first thought is that we need to see what it's comparing it to, because there was not a big push for office to apartment conversions over the past 4 years. So comparing, I mean, and sometimes these articles do this, they throw out these crazy percentages, but listen, nobody was converting from office to apartments 4 years ago. So I think we need to keep it in perspective. I think it can help by increasing affordable housing. It does make sense. The problem is it is so expensive to convert from office to single family apartments. It's the way that office buildings are built out. If you think about it, the housing plates are just not conducive to apartments. So the reason that it's not done more often is because it's costly. The numbers don't make sense. In fact, cities have to incentivize it a ton. And so the question is, do those incentive dollars, are they better used for converting that office to apartment, or are they better used for other things by the city? And, I think it's just costly. So did you want to add anything on there, Pops?
Yeah, let's make those costs real, GC, right? Like if you really think about converting an apartment to an office to an apartment, you're either going to have like a giant 1 bedroom apartment with one tiny little bathroom in it, or you're going to have to add a whole bunch of plumbing and a whole bunch of like really expensive things that go into it, right? Like you'd have to increase the kitchen floor plate and the things, the piping that go into kitchen, right? Like these are significant construction costs when you're talking about an interior build out is plumbing, right? Like it's the stuff that's made of metal and you have to like get it from a whole nother area into another. You might have to increase capacities for water flows, things of that type of sort. Am I getting that kind of right, GC, as you're the expert builder here?
Well, yes, definitely. I haven't done any office to apartment conversions, but I know that it's really expensive. You just like elevator shafts go up and then open up into the floor plate. Like that's not how an apartment works, right? You have the elevator shaft and it's just thinking through things. I don't have a cost for this, but I can tell you that it's really expensive to move things around in an office building, because I do know what we're spending on JWB's office building just to renovate an office building, and it's expensive to renovate. Again, the office buildings that you're talking about converting largely are the ones that have been sitting around for a while as well. So those are, it's just, in theory, it makes sense. It's just not being done a whole lot. And to address why Jacksonville might be number, I think, 14 or 15 on the list, I mean, you think about the ways to solve the affordable housing problem. In Jacksonville, we have a lot of land. And so, we can solve the affordable housing problem from any of these ways that we've just talked about on the National Association of Home Builders 10-point plan. And they're a whole lot less expensive. Like changing zoning is a whole lot less expensive than creating incentive programs to fund downtown developers to convert from office to apartments. And that's why it's not necessarily being done as much in Jacksonville as, other places. New York, they don't have a whole lot of land to go and build. So it might make sense more in a city like New York to do office to apartment, even than it would in Jacksonville.
Love it, man. And shout out to Drew Barnhill, who shared the article about JWB's renovation of the Greenleaf building in the WhatsApp chat, which talked about all the expenses that you guys are going through to renovate your office building. It does not seem insignificant, my friend. All right, so here's a hot take from me. A lot of what's being talked about right now in these mandates, in this like in the one of the big ones is this like DOGE, right? Department of Government Efficiency, is cutting down overhead and cutting down governmental, departments, and those have historically been seen as a major commercial real estate footprint. They have big commercial real estate footprints. In fact, I think federal government spends $5 billion annually on leasing private office space. There's about 21.5 million square feet of usable office space in headquarters of 24 government agencies alone. We're coming off of this trend of people working from home, and like what they talk about is this idea that a lot of it is underutilized right now. So an easy place to go in there and cut spending would be to just like downsize these leases, downsize this kind of like spend on office space. And when I think about that, I think of an already embattled commercial real estate economy that where people have already taken a couple of haircuts. And I wonder if that is something that, could negatively affect real estate investors that are in the commercial real estate space. And another case for this idea of like, if you're going to be a real estate investor, all these headwinds tell you that, hey, everything is uncertain because there's so much change happening. But at the end of the day, this single family home asset class has just kind of like less volatility. What do you think about that, GC?
I'll just jump on the last point. I do think there's certainly merit to what you're talking about. I think a lot of it comes down to it's supply and demand. So how much concentration is your market in your marketplace when it comes to government jobs might be something to take into account. But I'm just going to jump on the last thing you said. Is we continue to show risk factors in the commercial real estate world or in the apartment world that we just don't have in the single family world. I mean, at the end of the day, the government put an executive order together to talk about putting plans together to make sure that housing costs don't continue to go up so much, right? It's not like they're doing that on the commercial side, right? You know, like, and then again, if thinking about it as an investor, just keeping it really simple, you want to be owning something that there's not a lot of supply of that a lot of people want, right? If the government understands that affordable housing is so important, and they thought it was so important that in the first week of an office for them to say, hey, listen, I want to see stuff put together so that the costs don't continue to rise at the same level. Like, that just means it's a good asset to buy and hold, right? And you don't see this type of intervention on the commercial real estate side, you know? So again, I just like to keep it really simple, guys. Buy something that there is something in short supply and that a lot of people want. Single family rental properties fit that bill.
I think that's a pretty good way to end this, right? Like this idea of like, hey, we may feel like we're in like this chaotic world. At the end of the day, let's go back to first principles. You know, the reason why all this stuff, why there's such an elevated conversation around the housing supply is because it is in low supply and high demand. There is a lot of work to be done to stop this idea that housing prices are going up at like a ridiculous rate. And at the end of the day, as real estate investors, holding that asset that sits there is an asset in good position when everything else feels really, really turbulent. And you know, and it's so decentralized that for it to create a giant dent in it has to have so much effort from so many different moving tentacles that are so hard to put together. It makes me as a real estate investor feel pretty good about the idea that, you know, like my approach to building wealth is essentially a 60-40 portfolio, but that 60 is single family rental homes in growing markets that and like investing in these like workforce housing that's chronically undersupplied and always going to be demanded. It's just kind of like the zoom out perspective. Anything there, GC?
Love the way you break it down, brother. I think you know, it's just you have this beautiful asset sitting right under our noses, and you can do it in a way where everybody wins. The resident wins, our country wins, you win, and it's right here. It's right outside our doors right now. Single family homes.
I love it, man. I want to thank the community for making what we thought was going to be like a super, super hard thing into a relatively easy conversation to hold. We try to stay true to this idea of being bipartisan, sticking to like the stuff that we know, not injecting opinions. Greg even gave me some feedback ahead of time of an opinion that I was going to put in there that wasn't really an opinion, but then we took it out. But you know, we know it's not hard. We know it's not easy to do. We know this is hard to just like not get emotional around. We appreciate you all showing up. We had 120 plus people, middle of the workday, show up here for a relevant discussion. I'm hoping that we gave you some nuggets to walk away from here that will make you a more informed investor, to make you a more balanced person in the home. Because at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that, you know, polarization is not the answer. Coming together is the answer. And this community is a really, really good example of that. We have a special Fortune Builders webinar coming up on Thursday, where we're going to be going over the best markets for rentals. It is a variation of a show that we already did, but if you are a Fortune Builders client, you're more than welcome to join that webinar. Again, we always have the community showing up and supporting in there, and it adds a lot of richness and texture to it. And you're going to know the answers to the test before it happens, so you'll look even smarter in the chat. And then on Tuesday, we have a unique opportunity, right? Like I love talking about companies that eat their own dog food, right? As like a way to build real empathy towards clients and also trust in a market. And at the end of the day, JWB is unique in the sense that it is approaching its own way of building a business by the way that you are approaching building your own wealth, right? Through having single family rental home property investing as the center point of value creation that creates all this. And Greg and his partners recently just sold a property or two after 10 years of owning it. And we're going to go over the case study, right? Like, what was the outcome that it achieved? What was it that they were getting into it? What did they actually profit from in the 5 profit centers? What are they putting that money to use? And what it would look like for somebody starting today of how they can use the same exact strategy. That's going to be a really fun show on Tuesday. GC, I'm really glad you brought it up. Anything to add to that?
Man, I can't wait. It's going to be a great example of just what I talked about, how everybody can win. We're going to talk about how the community wins. We're going to talk about how the resident wins. We're going to talk about how JWB as the investor wins. And you'll get to see how you, when you make a similar decision, will win after buying and holding these same assets.
Love it. Thank you, community, for being so awesome as always. One final piece of advice, GC, take it away.